Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Robert Green, and today we're going to talk about IntelliTest. And to do that, I'm joined by Wendy Brighting and John Fleischer. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Hello.
Great to see you.
good to be here.
And before we dive in, give us a brief introduction to yourselves in case, Wendy, people haven't seen you, or John, you're new to the show, if I'm not mistaken.
Hey,
Yeah, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Wendy Brighting. I am a product manager in the .NET languages and tooling space at Microsoft, and work on testing and C# and F# and VB and all the great things that we have in .NET and tooling.
Awesome.
yeah, John Fleischer. I am actually a developer mostly on the testing team and recently doing some things with Copilot. But yeah, I've been working on Test Explorer and things in that arena for several years now.
Cool. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but IntelliTest is not a brand new thing. It's been around for a while, but it's making a bit of a comeback. Is that a correct way to put it?
Yeah, well, IntelliTest as a feature in Visual Studio has been around for quite a few years, but it's been limited in recent years to older frameworks. It, of course, originated as PEX out of Microsoft Research, so it has been around a while. And if you look for documentation on it, you'll find those names.
All right, cool. So I guess the question is, what is it and what's new with it and how do we use it? I guess we can cover that.
Yes, awesome. So IntelliTest has been available and is available in Visual Studio Enterprise, but we have changed it a little bit. We've made it better, and I'll talk about what we have done to it in a little bit. But to give you a high-level overview of what IntelliTest is, it helps you achieve high code coverage at a fraction of the cost of you writing by hand all of the tests that you need to do. It looks at your code, analyzes it, and goes through and creates statements to make sure, test cases to make sure that all of the statements are reached, to really make sure that you have high coverage when you are doing your tests. And the great thing about IntelliTest is when it generates the test, you can pick and choose which ones you want to save in order to have yourself a nice regression suite to continue to use in the future.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So as we said, it's been around for a really long time. It supported the old frameworks, but this new version that we currently have in preview, it now supports x64 projects, and it supports projects targeting .NET 6 and .NET 7. I know .NET 8 just came out. That is in our backlog to get added very, very soon. But right now you can all of your .NET 6 and all your .NET 7 projects, you can now create tests for.
Cool.
And so, yeah.
So if you have a project that you did in .NET 8, you would wait for support to be there, right? Could you just kind of target 7, build the tests, then switch back over to 8 and have it run? Or do you really need to wait? Is it supporting .NET 8 in kind of design time or runtime or both, I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I've actually worked with some folks who did exactly that. And the main reason is due to profiling and instrumentation of the framework when tests are generated, there's a compatibility issue during the generation time. But yeah, you can actually do that. Now, obviously, that's a sort of an experimental way to approach it, but you could do that.
Okay.
So with that, I think we can hand it over to John to kind of show us how you get started and how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first off, I do want to just remind everyone on this is in previews for Visual Studio, and in the previews, you can turn on the preview flag under preview features, and it would be this one that says IntelliTest support. So just making sure everyone is aware of that.
And it's in the 11, the preview features in the 11.9 preview of Visual Studio, right? So if you have 11, 17.9. I don't know why I keep saying 11. 17. Yeah. If you have 17.8, then you won't see that. But if you have a 17.9 preview, then you'll be able to see the preview of IntelliTest. Right. I believe is correct, right?
Yeah, the preview did come out in 17.8, but it is a preview feature. So once 17.8 was released, it's no longer there. But in 17.9 previews, it is there.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so what I kind of wanted to show you, just a variety of things. Going to keep the code kind of simple here so I can focus on what the features actually do. The actual application within somebody's environment will be more complex than what I'm demonstrating today, but I think it'll be easier to see the features when the code is simpler. So I wanted to point out here, I have a solution where I actually have probably the exact same code in a bunch of different projects. So I could go to any one of these, but since we're probably more interested in modern frameworks, I'm gonna go to Net 7. And one of the things I'll point out here is the fact that we're looking at public methods, and I'm going to show you something later that is brand new. But what we basically have with this code is we have these couple of features down here, and I want to create a understanding what the difference is. So once you turn on the IntelliTest Preview flag, you will have this preview menu, which gives you the option to create a project or generate tests. And we'll go through that. Create unit tests. Actually, what create unit tests does is something quite different. It will actually simply just create a project for you that has stubs for every method in your public method in your current file. So that's useful, but it's not IntelliTest, and I wanted to be sure to call out that difference. So this just creates stubs for all your public methods in a new project or an existing project. IntelliTest is something quite different. So we're going to start by looking at generating tests. So let me go back here. I've selected this very simple method that calls one helper method, and I'm going to say, let's generate some tests for this. Generate tests. So what happens is, obviously, the build happens. I'm going to expand this window. What it's going to do is it's going to start doing multiple symbolic executions against this code. We do use in the background is a Z3 theorem solver, and that's also open source. You could look into that if you're interested. But what it does is it generates tests that we're seeing kind of previews of over here. And we're also seeing in this bar how many blocks of code we're actually covering with the tests that got generated. So this is pretty fascinating. It is possible it will create a test that fails. And obviously, there are remedies for that. We'll see some of that later on as we look at other things. We see this icon here where we can save it. We see the run icon, which will basically generate and run the tests again. And what it's doing, like I said, what it's actually doing is not true, I guess, execution like normal tests would be at this point. It's symbolic execution and it's code generation, but yet nothing is saved. Nothing has changed over here. So it does give us the opportunity to kind of play with those things. So let's look at this again. I'm going to show you one more thing. I don't think it'll take too long, but I can actually come up and I can actually generate tests for the entire class. Well, that takes a little bit longer, obviously. But what will happen then is as it goes through and generates them for every method in that class, I then can select between them and move along this list. So we looked at has even value. And what's really interesting about this that I wanted to kind of demonstrate here is we've got a lot of odd integers here, which seemingly has no particular reason why it would be there. But let's go look at the isEven function. And what we see is I've arbitrarily coded into this a bunch of specific numbers that it went through coverage and theorem solving, figured out what values should go in here. So if we go ahead and change one of these, say I change this to 928. Let's run this again. We see we no longer have the 944, we have 928. So that's the type of work that IntelliTest is going to do on these methods. It's not just the method that you're particularly generating tests for, it's all the code that gets executed when that test runs.
Cool.
So at this point, there is the question then that Wendy alluded to was arbitrarily deciding which tests to keep and which tests you might not want to keep.
Mhm.
And that gets us back to create projects. So we can actually hit the save button right here, and it will generate a project for us and save these tests out. And we'll do that in a minute. Or we could go individually to a specific test, save it here, and that again will prompt us to generate a project, create a project, or use an existing project to save these tests to. Or we can come back to this particular class and create a project here. So let's just do that. Let's create a project. And this dialog looks very similar to the create unit tests dialog. Again, you can control which testing framework it's going to generate for. You can select an existing project if it exists, change namespaces, change class, whatever. This is what you do. But let's just create one, and we'll take a quick look at what a project like that might look like. PEX tests look quite a bit different from tests that we typically write for common frameworks. PEX tests have these kind of invocation methods. So you'll see for all those methods I had in my public class over here, I've now got these sort of stub methods, and it will create an instance of the class that we are actually testing and pass it in here, and we'll actually, so this code looks really odd to us, but the good thing is that for the most part, until you get into really difficult situations, you don't necessarily have to look at that. So I'm going to close that out. You can do other things there, like create type factories and so forth, which is really interesting, and we'll look at doing that in the future.
So I guess the question is the general thinking then that you won't need to go in and modify the generated tests, and let's say you're familiar with one of the other unit testing frameworks, you don't now need to learn the PEX language.
Well, I think the best application for this is going to be in a situation where you don't have time or opportunity to go craft very specific tests, and
Okay.
you would really like to have something that guards against regression. And this allows you to generate all the tests over and over again in very, very complex situations, creating more complex models and so forth. It doesn't have a semantic understanding of what a book is, or what a library is, or what a student is, or what a teacher is. And so if you have concepts like that in your software, you'll have to do a little bit more to create factories of objects that the test framework can use. I don't know if we have time to go into that today, but there are facilities for that within PEX as well. They're just called PEX factory methods, and I'll show you how they get introduced to us later on.
Okay.
So at this point, we've got this project, but it's basically just a stub for running tests. We haven't actually saved a test. So let's go out here and let's click on this. Let's see. I'm just going to save them all. It may end up creating another project for me. Let's see. No, there they are. So what it does is it actually creates this file g.cs, indicating it's a generated file.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go look at it. Let me see if I can make some room here. So here's where we have, this auto-generated information at the top. So we're really not going to, it's telling you don't actually modify this file. So we saved this one test. It's called it this, it's generated this name. And now if we actually go to the test explorer, which is where you're used to running tests from, this will actually show up here. There it is.
All right, cool.
And the navigation is the same. So we can actually run this test from here, just like any other test. So that's where it starts to feel normal, and that's where it starts to feel like, okay, if that goes out in CI, then obviously that'll get run, so all the better, right? And remember, what's really cool about that is we've already shown that we've got 100% block coverage for that one little method. So these tests, in this case, not all that consequential, but in other cases where you have important methods to test like this has the potential to save you a lot of time in these sort of scenarios. If we come back here and I think we can actually select all of these and save them all at the same time, then we'll see this file has gotten quite a bit larger.
Right. So you mentioned CI. There's no problem having these run in GitHub Actions or Azure Pipelines.
Yeah, the code doesn't look any different. Once you've built it, this assembly looks like any other testing DLL, and it still has
cool.
all the. In this case, we're in MS Test, so we have test methods marked and so forth. So very, very usual to the testing environment in CI and would be reported back. That's really kind of the nice part of it. I mean, the whole behind the scenes and generating of tests that you would do manually, obviously, then you would check in your test code at that, just like any other test code.
Right. And I love the idea of I've got a project I've been working on for 2 years and I never got around to writing unit tests. And now I can have this write all my tests for me and stick it into my pipeline or my GitHub action, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, that's certainly.
I don't have to learn anything about testing. I can just let it do all my tests for me, right?
Oh, if only. Maybe we'll get that done next week. But it definitely is a tool that will kind of enhance your ability to create large numbers of tests just to safeguard blocks of code automatically. It certainly can't understand all types of code. It has some limitations that we could list out, but it does have some really interesting features to help you minimize those, and I think I'll have time to probably show you one of those. I wanted to show you kind of one of our party pieces, though, in this particular upgrade. So notice that I had this particular file, everything was public. One of the things that Wendy mentioned, that we're supporting, not only supporting that framework, we're supporting that standard, we're supporting Net 7, Net 6. The other thing we're supporting is internal methods now, now the interesting thing about this is if I come in now and I say generate for this particular method that's now internal, it'll actually prompt me to create a project. Okay. It won't prompt me to create a project because I had one already. But if I were to go to Net 6, which I should have done, and say generate tests, it don't want to let me do it. I guess I'm not going to be able to show that. Try it. Let me read the message this time. Non-pro. Okay, so let's see. Well, what I would expect to happen there and should have happened there is it should prompt me for to create a project, because once we create a project, then from an internal we actually create internals visible to that allows us to go ahead and write tests for it, which is something you would normally do manually. In this particular case, for whatever reason, it's not currently working for me. I don't have an internal in there. So, and it already did this one because it already had a test, so that doesn't really show it.
Okay.
But bottom line is, once you've created for an internal one, you will be able to test internal methods, which is something we've never done in the past. It's just been a limitation of the implementation that was never gone after. So that's also a big improvement. And again, that allows you, because most people aren't writing public methods in a lot of their code. A class will be internal, or much of the code will be internal, and you still want to be able to test it. And if you've written many tests, you're pretty accustomed to using internals visible to your test assembly.
Right.
And that'll be handled more automatically in these cases now.
Cool.
But yeah, if you have a private, that is the message you're going to see still. There's no way to access a private method, obviously. So, yeah, so you would expect to see that. This really should be working for internals, so that's why it's a preview.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the things we're looking for in having it in previews is to get more folks experimenting with it, getting more feedback, so we have more examples, more understanding of how people are trying to use it,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not, where the edges aren't quite smooth that we need to work on. So previews are supposed to be a tool for us to get more feedback from users. I'm hoping folks will give it a try.
Sure. Does it work better with some or not as well with certain project types versus others, Maui, Blazor, etc.?
At the moment, I mean, we have a list of backlog features we want to add, but at the moment, straight C# code in general, it will work well with,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether it's Maui or Blazor or something. If you have a library that's C#, you should be able to use it. There's some limitations around generics and some other things that will kind of be a blocker for the short term. But in general, C# libraries, I mean, the front end stuff, web pages, things like that, this isn't going to be a help with. You're
Right.
really thinking libraries in this case.
Mm-hmm.
I did have one more thing to show, and hopefully it's not too weird to show, because I didn't really plan enough time to work through it all. But this is the in-unit public repo, and I just pulled it out, and there's a class called test filter here. And so this is more complex. I mean, it's not just a do I have an even number type method. When you generate tests for a class or a method that's a little bit more complex, there are some opportunities that it will show you. Let's get back down here to that longer method from node. So this is a complex type that we don't know about,
Mm-hmm.
in types, test filters. So let's generate for something like that. That was the preview flag that got me. It wasn't on when I started that before. So
Okay.
that's why that happened. So in this case, it'll take a little while. Well, it doesn't look like it's going to build, but let's see if it'll generate tests anyway. Oh no.
So if it can't build, it won't. Will it? If it can't build, it can't generate tests. Is that true?
That shouldn't be true in this case,
Okay.
but it looks like it actually is. So I'm missing a project. Well, let's go back. I can kind of show it in the other scenario. It just isn't as meaningful. What I was going to show you is when you get these warnings in the in-unit project, I was going to show you that there were complex types it was offering to create factories for. And over here, I don't have the same kind of errors or warnings here. What I would see in the other case would be I'm guessing on how to create this particular type, and the fix there then will generate some code for me that actually sets up a factory. So
Okay.
so I'm kind of bummed that didn't actually build. I could probably try to fix it, but that'll be boring.
I think we got the point.
So there are things built into the tool that will allow you to you'll get these types of limitations or warnings that tell I guessed at how to create this. I don't think I have an example here that's going to help us with that. We could try it on another one. But there are things built into the tool that will actually, so that internal it wanted to actually create a project for, so lovely. So I'm looking to see if I get more warnings that are more helpful. I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
So you will get a warning that provides you an opportunity to create a factory, and then you can go into the factory and create objects and things like that. So it does have hints and helps like that are also built into the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Even ways that these strings you can kind of suggest to it what collection of strings to use. So they're very interesting helps it can provide as well. But the main things were primarily to show the difference between this and create unit tests. The fact that this actually um, uh, goes about instrumenting the code, collecting coverage, and looking at the values you're using to create a test that's reasonable.
Fantastic. So people with the preview should play around with this. I know I'm going to try it on my latest Maui project when we're done here and see what happens.
Absolutely.
And what should they do if they have suggestions or issues? The usual vehicle, developer community?
Yeah, the feedback right through Visual Studio would be great.
Okay.
In addition, there is also log output that is provided here.
Okay.
That can, if you turn on diagnostic logs, especially, there'll be more information here that would be helpful if you file feedback. Most of that stuff comes to us if you file feedback and include your logs when you file that. But
Right.
those are the things that will be most helpful. The different types, once obviously the simple things like I've shown you, you can generate without and run without any intervention at all. As things get more complex, you have to be more patient and figure out how to test your stuff a little bit more. It's not completely automatic in that way. But maybe there'll be more intelligence in it one of these days that will solve some of those problems for us.
And I know it's in preview now. What are your thoughts on when we could maybe expect to see it?
Well, we're primarily, again, pushing for external testing, right? For external users to try it and give us feedback. We certainly want to get this out within, a coming release, one of the, as soon as possible, and one of the new releases coming out after the first of the year.
Okay.
Just the amount of feedback we get and the opportunity to understand how well it's working for folks will dictate a lot of that. But 17, what are we on, 17.9 now, 17.10 coming sometime in those future releases. We hope to be able to turn this on as a GA feature.
But basically, if we want to see it, we need to use it and test it and let you know how it works.
That's it. That's the main thing.
Fair enough.
That'll dictate when the choices around that, right?
All right. That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. Everybody play around with this if you're interested in. I know I am. And let's get this thing fixed up and ready for us.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Well, thanks for having us on.
All right. Thanks so much. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and we will see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.